Hello, my name's Harold Halfdane, and welcome to Archaeological Minecraft. I'm a former archaeologist who enjoys playing Minecraft and thought it would be fun to combine the two. In today's episode, we'll be talking about Brochs. A Broch is an Iron Age dry stone structure that is found in the north of modern-day Scotland, specifically in Caithness, Sutherland, and the Northern Isles, like the Orkney and Shetland Islands. There are thought to be around 500 to 600 Brochs created, and while some of the most famous of these, such as the Broch at Musa, can be found on the Orkney Islands, the vast majority and highest concentration of Brochs can be found in the Scottish county of Caithness, which is located in the north of Inverness, on the topmost tip of Scotland, towards the direction of the Northern Isles. Being on the northernmost end of modern Scotland didn't mean that the builders of the Brochs or those communities were isolated. Pottery fragments found at some Brochs show that the inhabitants imported wine and olives from the Mediterranean, and others contained Roman pottery. Both of those show their access to extensive trade networks. Their purpose appeared to be homesteads for high-status families, and while they were not designed to withstand a prolonged siege, they did provide some protection to the Broch communities through their fortifications. We'll get to talking more about those later. Before we get to that, let's talk a bit about when Brochs were constructed. Brochs date to around the 1st centuries BC to around the 1st century AD. While there's been conjecture in the past that some might have dated earlier due to the dating of a sheep bone at a site at the Old Caithness Broch in Shetland, which dates to around 390 and 200 BC, the general consensus is that the construction was, as I said, during the last few centuries BC and the 1st century AD. While new Broch construction appears to end around 100 AD, archaeological evidence points to Brochs being occupied, added to, or modified as needed through the late Iron Age, which in Scotland dates to around 300 to 900 AD. That means that some Brochs might have been occupied for 1,000 years. Talk about being built to last. Now that we've covered some basics for when the Brochs date to, where they were located, and their frequency on the landscape, let's dive into the structure itself. One thing to say off the bat is that while there are similarities and characteristics that are similar between structures, no two Brochs are alike. As such, I haven't tried to replicate an exact Broch in this build, but rather built a Broch that uses thematic characteristics often found in Brochs in order to provide an introduction and examples of those characteristics and how those might fit into your own Minecraft world. I mentioned before that Brochs were a dry stone construction. That means that the rocks used in its construction were placed and fit together without the use of mortar. The main tower in the Broch is double walled, meaning there's an outer wall and an air gap and then an inner wall. Both walls together amounted to a thickness of around 3 to 5 meters, or around 10 to 15 feet in depth. The outer wall slopes gently inward, where it joins with the inner wall at the top of the tower. The two walls were joined together with slabs which span the air gap. These gaps are called galleries. This type of construction had a number of practical advantages. First is that building the walls in this manner created a more secure and stronger structure while using less material. This is because a triangular shape is naturally more stable than a rectangular shape placed on its end. It also allowed the builders to place a staircase between the two segments of wall, which allowed people access to the first floor of the tower and galleries from the ground floor. The stairs are always found on the left side of the entrance and would travel clockwise up the Broch between the two wall segments. The galleries between the two walls also allowed for areas to be segmented off for storage. In the walls were recessed niches known as umbries, which seem to have been similar in use to a cupboard. One umbries found at the Cairnsbroch in Orkney contained remnants of medicinal plants. The other reason for the air gap, which is also discussed in a couple of other past videos, namely the video on the turf longhouse at Stonk, which also had an air gap between the outer turf wall and the inner wooden walls, but also mentioned in the Irish ring forts video, where the wattle and daub roundhouse at the ring fort at Deer Park Farms had dual-walled construction was that having two walls and an air gap provides excellent insulation for the interior space, keeping the cold out and the warmth from the fire in. In the case of Brochs, storing supplies and foodstuffs between the two layers of dry stone walls helped preserve the food and allowed it to keep for longer. Sometimes smaller rooms called cells would be built into the thickness of the wall with access from the inside of the Broch and accessible from the ground floor. It isn't clear the exact purpose of these rooms, but the cell entrances sometimes had a door jamb that would seal the door from the inside. So they might have been a small storage room that had a door which opened inward instead of outward into the room, or a place where individuals could go where they could close the door and get some privacy. At some sites, evidence of grain has been found in the cells, pointing towards storage as their purpose, while others seem to have niches in the wall where some have speculated a lamp could be placed. The roof of the Broch was probably capped with thatch or might have been covered with stone slabs or turf. Though, if I'm being honest, all of those roof options are just guesses, as archaeologists aren't clear what the roof of Brochs were made from. But given that they had a similar use as roundhouses, a good educated guess was that their roofs might have been made in a similar manner to roundhouses. There was only a single entrance to the Broch, which, while not universally the case, had a triangular-shaped lintel to help redirect and disperse the weight from over the doorway. The entryway door often faced east, which had the advantage of pointing the entrance toward the direction the sun rose, as well as facing the entrance away from the direction that wind most often flows, helping keep the interior space of the structure warm. Doorways were usually small and required someone to bend over slightly to enter. This helped keep the heat of the building in, but also, as mentioned above, due to the massive weight of stone in the walls, having a smaller doorway helped mitigate and reduce the weak point in the structure created by that doorway. If you recall, I mentioned that the walls themselves could be 3 to 5 meters thick, so both sides of the entrance had its own door. This created a bit of a natural entry hallway. It allowed for both doors to be secured and barred in case of strife, but in times of peace enabled people to come in out of the rain and cold, take off their outer winter clothing without opening up the inner door and letting out all the heat and letting in all the damp. In some Brochs, human remains have been found deposited in a deliberate manner in the entryway, though the reason for this isn't known. In the middle of the entrance hallway, there was often a low door that led into a small room called a guard cell. This room was built into the thickness of the wall and was oblong in shape with a corbelled roof. Corbelling means that the walls and roof slanted inward to better support the weight of the walls above the room. Some have speculated that these guard rooms might have contained a guard dog, which would have helped protect the entrance and alert the inhabitants to danger. While not found at all Brochs, some had an outer rampart wall that surrounded and protected the area around the Broch and its outbuildings. When found, these ramparts are around 2 meters deep and around 2 meters in height, being thicker around the entrance and in some of the other areas being incorporated into the outer walls of the outbuildings. On the outside of the rampart wall, a ditch was dug, which would have offered more protection and made it harder to climb over the rampart wall. Based on the evidence found by archaeologists, it seems that this ditch was often used by the inhabitants of the Broch as an area to toss their garbage. So imagine the inhabitants just kind of dumping their garbage over the rampart wall into that outer ditch. At the entrance of the rampart, there was a structure called a blockhouse, which acted like a form of gatehouse to help protect and guard the entrance. As with the entrance of the Broch itself, the entrance through the rampart was protected by an entrance passage with doors at each end which could be secured and barred, and also contained guard cells, which also potentially contained guard dogs. Between the rampart and the Broch was sometimes various outbuildings and a small courtyard. The outbuildings had different purposes which sometimes changed over time. Recall that these structures were sometimes inhabited for 1,000 years, and so it makes sense that perhaps things might have changed, these rooms might have been modified or added to in that time span. Some might have been used as workshops, storage areas, small pen for animals, etc. One type of outbuilding that's seen at quite a number of Brochs is called a wag. Its purpose isn't fully known, but some think it might have been a partially subterranean building, and its purpose might have been a larder to store dry goods similar to that of a souterrain. If you want to know more about souterrains, I have an episode about that you can check out. As we make our way from the outbuildings into the Broch itself, note the entry and guard cell we talked about earlier. I included a skull in the doorway as a nod to the human remains found in this area of some Brochs. As we go inside, you can see that the stone floor is subdivided into different rooms by vertical stone slabs. Minecraft doesn't have vertical stone slabs, so I used stone wall blocks to segment off the different rooms. Rooms varied in purpose in different Brochs, but generally there would have been a hearth in at least one of the rooms and a small well in another of the rooms. There's some debate as to the purpose of these wells, as some archaeologists feel it's unlikely that the well would have contained water that could be used for drinking or washing, but regardless of its purpose, many Brochs had them, so it clearly fulfilled an important function. As with the previous point of the outbuildings, which changed over time, the configuration of the buildings in the rooms on the ground floor of the Broch also changed over time. Some, but not all, Brochs have an internal set of stairs that allowed access from the ground floor to the first floor without having to use the set of stairs between the outer and the inner Broch walls. If we look up at the first floor from the ground floor, there's a scarsement coming out from the inner wall. A scarsement is a small ledge that would be used to hold up the beams of the first floor. Additionally, here's an example of what the umbries or cupboard might have looked like as well. So if we make our way up to the first floor from the ground floor, it isn't clear what exactly the first floor was used for, though it's possible it was used for sleeping, since it doesn't appear that there to be sleeping quarters on the ground floor itself. At the Clocktoll Broch, there is evidence of burnt remains of woven wattle mesh. So it's possible that at the first floor had either a wattle flooring or had wattle room separators. Also at the Clocktoll Broch, there was evidence of fleas, bed bugs, and other beetles, as well as rodents, which lived with the inhabitants in the Broch. As mentioned previously, you can see how the galleries might have been used for additional storage. Above the first floor would sometimes be a second floor, which would only have been accessible by ladders and not stairs. It's possible the second floor was used for storage of things like grain or perhaps light storage materials that was easy to carry up and down the ladders. Some Brochs wouldn't have been tall enough to contain a second floor. However, in this Broch that I made in Minecraft, I did include a second floor to give an example of this. Well, that's it for today's episode. I hope you liked the episode diving into Brochs, their history, and the uses and characteristics of the structure. If you want to know more about Brochs, I want to point you to a couple of resources that helped me with today's episode. The first is a book by Andrew Held and John Barber named Caithness Archaeology, Aspects of Prehistory. And the second is the Caithness Broch Project. The Caithness Broch Project is a fascinating and exciting bit of experimental archaeology where archaeologists are attempting to reconstruct a Broch in real life in Caithness. I took some inspiration of the Broch that they're building in real life in my Minecraft version of this Broch. I put the information for both resources in the description below. I hope this episode served as a bit of inspiration for perhaps building a Broch in your own Minecraft world, or maybe you learned something or had fun along the way. If you liked the video, please take the time to leave me a comment and let me know what you enjoyed about it. Or, if you have a suggestion of how I can improve these videos, please let me know that as well. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to be notified of when I release future videos. Thanks, and have a great day. Bye for now.